Now.
Hi, everyone. I'm Tony Veroven, Exchange Community Manager at CSIA. Thank you for attending this month's CSIA webinar. Today, Mike Harvath, President and CEO of Revenue Rocket Consulting Group, will present Transformative Business Models for System Integrators, the Fundamentals. If you like what Mike has to say, be sure to attend the 2017 Executive Conference, May 2nd through the 5th in Fort Lauderdale, Florida, where Mike will be a featured speaker on business models. A reminder that if you have questions for our speaker, please use the Q&A box to the right of your screen, not the chat box. This program, like many of CSIA webinars, will be archived on controlsys.org, typically within 24 hours of the broadcast. Many thanks to John Weber, Monica Anderson, and the whole team at Software Toolbox for hosting and sponsoring our monthly webinars. Software Toolbox was created in 1996 to rid the industry of bad third-party software experiences. They do this by providing a variety of industrial automation software tools and applications, the knowledge of how they work together, or with other automation software to deliver end-user value, and a responsive, proven support process, all focused on lowering risk. Find them on the web at softwaretoolbox.com. Today's presenter, Mike Harvath, founded Revenue Rocket in 2001 after having led several multi-million-dollar technology companies through both turnaround and rapid growth phases. Prior to that, Harvath managed a $600 million region of a multinational information technology company that grew a whopping 600% under his stewardship. Growth is a part of his DNA, and it's this type of achievement that's made him a leading spokesman and sought-after advisor to the world's best technology companies. He is widely recognized as one of the top IT company growth strategists and M&A advisors in the industry. Please welcome Mike Harvath.
Thanks, Tony. Appreciate it very much. As Tony mentioned, I'm Mike Harvath, President and CEO of Revenue Rocket. We're going to be talking about transformative business models today. And first, I'm going to introduce who Revenue Rocket is, in case you haven't heard of us. We are the premier growth strategy consultancy and M&A brokerage firm for the IT market. We focus exclusively on SIs and IT services companies globally. We've worked with about 450 firms globally since our inception now almost 16 years ago. And really our team of consultants and partners are all experienced in the space. Many of them have owned and run businesses just like yours over the years. And they, as I, have a desire to pay it forward and bring that cumulative knowledge back to the market so that others can use it and ultimately thrive through sharing that information. So to that end, we're going to dive right in to the content. As I mentioned, it's really today we're going to talk about transformative models. We're going to talk about sort of the fundamentals of what we see as a successful model and what we see as a flagging model, and then talk a little bit about how to make the transition. I would encourage you, if you have questions, as Tony mentioned, to put your questions in the box, as well as we're available after the webinar to address those via phone or email accordingly. So we'll get into the fundamentals, a little bit about focus and why that's important, kind of how things have changed in the market, critical components of the transformation, and sort of the vendor difference. A little bit about fundamentals of top-performing systems integrator. They typically look like this, right? They're aligned on 3 or less industries. The best performers align to a micro market or a vertical market, as we'll call it, exclusively. and they're perceived as the best provider in that space. Typically, they offer a service, not just project-based services, but services that are connected to the cloud, oftentimes as a way for their clients to harvest data. They tend to offer a full life cycle of services, wedge offerings, technology offerings, and managed offerings. And when we refer to managed offerings, we're typically referring to what we'll call maintenance and support, for lack of a better term, of the things that are done in the technology offering area. Services are typically sold as a service level agreement, or what we'll call all-in pricing, subscription-based models. I know that there's been a lot of discussion at CSIA about how to implement those models, and we'll be talking more about that in this presentation and in the conference when we're all together in Florida. Typically, the best performers have a solid organic growth strategy and some industry-specific IP that they have developed over time. And they'll typically productize that IP and then sell it into that market with what we'll call either a product plus services or a platform plus services approach. They typically perform pretty darn well, realizing about 12 to 28% EBITDA with sustained average annual growth rates of 20 to 40%. And we always sort of look at the industry through the lens of a transaction, partially because it's, we're in an industry where very few, or most of the companies, frankly, systems integration companies, started their companies sort of with the end in mind. And ultimately will look to do some sort of transaction to amalgamate their business or merge their business with some other player and exit. And in the context of that, we typically see these types of system integration companies, when they sell, commanding a transaction multiple of 8 to 10x trailing 12 month EBITDA. And I see a question about no audio. Are you guys hearing my audio okay?
I will give him instruction on that one, Mike.
Okay, sounds great. Back to the point of multiples, 8 to 10 times trailing 12-month EBITDA. If we look at sort of a declining systems integrator profile or a flagging partner, it's usually someone who will sell to anyone in the geography, typically a geographic-focused business. They typically sell projects, one-and-done mentality. They tend to focus almost exclusively on the technology. They tend to cozy up to their vendor for leads. And it has created a challenge to grow the business successfully, and you can see that in the metrics. It's a reactive growth strategy, typically realizing 3 to 6% EBITDA, and also having some downward pressure on the annual growth rates. As a matter of fact, some of these guys, depending on their market, if they're in a competitive market, are seeing a negative annual growth rate pressure up to a maximum of about 10%. They're also experiencing, I think this is interesting from our review, about 1 to 2% year-over-year negative EBITDA pressure. So if you look particularly over the last 2 to 3 years, there's been downward pressure on margins that's reflected in year-over-year EBITDA performance that's declining. And, again, if this is sort of your profile, you can get some perspective on that based on these key metrics. Also, the transaction multiples tend to be, 4 to 7 times, so you can see markedly less than the 8 to 10 times. In this situation, if you would look for a future transaction, obviously you would like to be to see a higher transaction multiple. A little bit about technology and market focus. We call it specialization and verticalization. When we look at what buyers want, and I think This is important because it tends to drive the optimal business model through the market. And they typically want market specialists who can apply technology to their industry. And so, you know, when you're looking at a buyer, in this case, the context of a buyer is a customer, they want to have a specialist. They want to have someone who can articulate their position in the market and be relevant. And we consider relevancy to be a position where you're number one or number two in the market you choose to serve. And there's clearly a target market intersection, and the components of that intersection are not only the industry vertical, or what we'll sometimes call the micro market, because I know that many of you guys are in manufacturing, and you might loosely call your vertical as manufacturing, but when push comes to shove, it needs to be much more granular than that. And, you know, corporate demographics, sort of technology set you focus on, and what we'll call service and product solutions that can vary, you know, everywhere from your own IP in the case of, you know, in the case of a platform or a product plus services play, or it may include a vendor's product. And then a full life cycle of service, we'll talk a lot about that. Typically, system integrators are somewhere on the journey of offering more one-and-done type projects, and a more full life cycle of services. Customers demand today a more full life cycle long-term relationship, and it's obviously the best way for you to monetize that relationship. It is an oversupplied market, and I would say that is the case in general, but also specifically within sort of the CSIA members. I would say there's too many generalists. That puts negative pressure on growth and profit and causes commoditization of talent and tools, and, you know, obviously irrelevancy of the technology versus the value of the solution is another point. And, you know, specialized market-based offerings are strategic versus more of a commodity. And when we differentiate those two things, clearly a specialized market offering by vertical and by the intersection of platform plus service, as well as leveraging vendor products, ends up in a situation where you can optimize margins. And so, you know, just an observation we've seen about the market. A little bit about, you know, buyer profile has changed. We've seen this particularly in the last 2 years, that the market has changed. There used to be a very vast community of technology buyers, and I think most systems integrators historically have sold to that technology buyer. What we've seen in the last 2 years, and this is not, you know, just our observation, it's also the observation of IDC and Gartner and others, is a shift towards the business buyer, in a pretty dramatic shift. So if we look at the end of 2014, and we look at the technology buyer versus the business buyer, they were about equally represented in the market. So if you were selling a solution to a technology buyer, and we define a technology buyer as someone within a customer organization who has responsibility for the technical solution versus someone who has responsibility for the P&L of the business or the P&L of the business unit, right? So about half of the market in the end of 2014 was technology buyers versus business buyers. At the end of 2016, that mix was 90% business buyers and 10% technical buyers, and that trend will continue. And there's a lot of reasons for that. You know, we highlight here the TripAdvisor effect. We call that sort of an effect of the ability of a business buyer to search, frankly, online for a vendor and make decisions is much easier now than it ever was. And typically, those business buyers do search for their vendors for a particular problem via Google or Bing. They typically will make a buying selection based on what they see online and before they call. They want an industry expert, and they typically want an OpEx type spend, not a CapEx type spend. So ideally, they want to subscribe to a service or a service level versus make a capital expenditure by buying stuff and or a project. And that's an important differentiator as to how the buyer has changed. Clearly, it is driving many of the key underpinnings of our need to transform our business models and needs to be taken seriously. We expect that the transformation to the business buyer will continue to the point where there will be very few technical buyers left. And it's important to note that. Now, different areas of the country have a different mix of business buyers and technical buyers, but I'm sort of mentioning this in the aggregate. I'll also further highlight the TripAdvisor effect. I kind of jumped over that. That typically has to do with peer referrals. So if you think about how you buy a car today or you might book a trip, you will go online and you will do some research. And in a concept of a B2C sort of, business-to-consumer type engagement, you will look for what your peers or people that look like you say about whatever thing you're looking to buy or whatever experience you're looking to purchase. We found that same training, if you will, or that same propensity has been transitioned to the business and in B2B commerce, particularly as it relates to hiring systems integrators and IT services companies to help with growing the business. So peer review or peer referrals as it relates to endorsements, if you will, online become very important, as well as your customer wants to see other customers like them in your customer base in order for them to perceive that you're qualified to help them. So that whole web presence, web marketing, inbound marketing, and the move via what we call a TripAdvisor effect has dramatically changed the way the market buys. So important to note. A couple of items about the critical components of transformation that I think are important. We're going to go much deeper into these topics when we're together at the conference, but I'll give you, we'll kind of skim the treetops in this presentation so that you can get a feel for what's important. Clearly, refining the target is critical, right? Being able to have a very narrow, what we call ideal prospect profile identified for your business is the cornerstone of your future success. So it does a variety of things, right? It drives inbound prospects without rejecting your existing customer. And as you make this transformation, it's critical that you apply all of these theories in an evolutionary way, not in a revolutionary way, okay? So understand that when we're proposing these and making this point, that it doesn't mean that you need to wake up tomorrow and completely redesign your go-to-market strategy and sort of throw the baby out with the bathwater. It's important that you understand sort of a very orderly roadmap to the transition. So as you're refining the target, as we call having a very narrow target, it allows inbound marketing to work properly. As a matter of fact, we have clients that get 50 to 75, and these are relatively small SIs, 50 to 75 net new inbound inquiries a month by having a very clear prospect profile that they market to online and that they sell to. So just a point of reference there. It obviously dramatically improves efficiency, quality of service, and probably most importantly, profitability, because the type of work that you do for these clients is very, very similar. Each stop on the full life cycle of services, whether that sort of be assessment or wedge development, wedge sales, to full-on technology efforts and projects, to maintenance and support, is such that it's targeted at a very narrow target. The primary reason you do that in refining the target is to eliminate competition. So, you know, you'll hear us talk a lot about relevancy, and relevancy has everything to do with being, you know, we believe you have to be perceived as the #1 or #2 vendor in the market that you choose to serve in order to be relevant. And there's a lot of studies that have been done at business schools all around the country about relevancy. But it's important to take that seriously as you sort of refine your target market, so that when someone in your target market looks to do business with you, you're perceived as the leader and or on a very, very short list of two that would be perceived the leader to service their needs. Standardizing the offerings is important, and we oftentimes talk about the full life cycle of offerings, whether those be wedges, the full technology offerings, managed offerings, and outsourced offerings. Most systems integrators spend all their time selling in technology offerings, and very little time, if any, selling a easy-to-buy wedge that will enable a new customer to come on board. And most don't do a very good job, frankly, of selling maintenance and support offerings, ongoing support of that client. And some have outsourced offerings, but that's typically the long-tail offering after the other three have typically been sold to a client. I would challenge all of you to look at thinking about the relationships you have with your clients as clients for life, and that this model is a circle, and that essentially you're going to onboard greenfield clients and customers at the wedge, and then move them through to a full-blown technology offering or project, and then into managed services as we define it, and then outsourced offerings, and then oftentimes back around. If it's thought of that way and designed that way, you can typically get a much broader share of wallet. It typically is structured around a service level agreement, which we'll talk to more in a minute, and it is a much richer relationship that the customer can experience your expertise, and you can enhance your profit. We're big proponents for service level agreements. Service level agreements deliver the work to put it sort of simply, either on a fixed sprint or a subscription basis. So if you think about agile methodology for any sort of project or deployment, it is positioned in fixed sprints, usually in a couple-week sprints. They're clearly defined with the client, and they subscribe to those fixed sprints. Now, whenever you offer a service level agreement type relationship with a client, you have to be able to have very, very good project management, right? Because in essence, if you are billing on a more hourly basis today, which I suspect many of you are, you don't necessarily have to have that, right? There's sort of a built-in incentive to use whatever hours have been sold in the SOW in order to optimize utilization and optimize profit. We're proponents that if you move to a more service level agreement-based pricing model, and it's more of a subscription, that it does a couple things for your business. First, we've seen companies that have made that transition, that wholesale transition, increase gross margins on average by 13%. So I'll just say that again. Companies that have made the change to selling the lion's share of their work with their customers and clients to service level agreements, they can enhance their gross margins by about 13%. So in the end, it is much, much more profitable. And part of the reason for that is it will help you become more efficient. So in the case of an hourly billing model, as I said before, there isn't as much incentive in being efficient. For example, if you sell a client a project and you're able to do it in a third of the time as estimated, the client gets all the benefit, right? In a service level agreement model, provided you're providing the work on time and on budget and you're doing it per the service level agreement, if you're able to do it in a third the time because you've developed a better process or you're using new tools, you will harvest that profit. And in the end, that's how there's a significant profitability increase amongst systems integrators that move to service level agreements. So we're going to go much deeper into this topic at the conference. So for those of you that will be there, I encourage you to attend my presentation. We're going to give much more of a how-to on how to implement service level agreement models and how to make it easy for your clients to onboard and frankly reduce the barrier for them to come out of your arrangement. And we'll show you why that's important as it relates to increasing your close rates at the conference. The other thing that I think is important, sort of as you guys are working through your transformation, is there needs to be a standard pricing model that is based on the reoccurring revenue model in the service level agreement or delivered through that service level agreement. There's a couple of reasons why that's important is because most of the time, systems integrators and tech services companies, when they propose new work, it's a bit of a science project. I know that I'm kind of preaching to the choir, but I'm sure a lot of you in the audience are experience that, right? To get a proposal out the door to a client to deliver what they have asked you for is usually a pretty substantial undertaking. Our premise and sort of the litmus test that we hold true is that if you've implemented the transformation successfully, that the proposal process should be minutes to an hour, and it should focus on beginning the engagement with a wedge, the relationship, and the technology offering should be easy to buy with simplified pricing so that you don't have to do these big, heady proposals that require lots and lots of cycles and thus lots of cost. And so we've proven this out. We've helped a couple hundred systems integration companies make this transformation successfully, and we've proven it out with them that it can be done. So for the skeptics in the audience that are like, yeah, but that won't work for me because we would challenge that, right? Because we've seen it, and we've advised many companies on this transformation. We'll open it up for questions here in a minute, so I'm sure there's some questions that you guys might have on that whole topic. The vendor difference, right? Vendors can help. There's needs to be an interdependence on vendors and not a codependence on vendors. And they really need to help the partner stand on their own. I would say that many systems integration companies are too reliant on the vendor. Too reliant on the vendor for leads, too reliant on the vendor for their existence. And they need to focus that energy on aligning their offering and weaving in the products from the vendor into a reoccurring revenue model that they can sell proactively to the market. And by doing that as a systems integrator, you reduce your reliance on a particular vendor which we think is important. You know, I don't want to offend any vendors that might be in the audience, but the reality of it is, you know, you need to build your business doing what's important to you and leveraging the vendor's products to enhance your product plus services or platform plus services offering to the client base. And it's not really the other way around. And so being able to drive your own book of business, to drive leads and opportunities into your business independent of the vendor will be really important. And so that's something that I've talked to you about. Obviously, you know, you package your products for different verticals. That's obvious. You know, how products move into the different verticals and micro markets is different. And so it may mean that as you're sort of thinking about aligning the business more carefully to this micro market, that it will become a different set of products for you. And so I would just, you know, mention that. And I noticed a question from Chris about wedges. We'll get into sort of develop more on the wedge in a moment, Chris, so hang in there. I guess there may be some questions about how wedges work. And then, you know, the real goal is to make it easy for the end user to buy through the partner. If a vendor has done their job, they're there to enable your ability to fulfill your sort of product plus services mission. And the right vendors do that versus requiring you to be a product pusher, right? So some vendors are much more focused on how much of my stuff can you sell, and we'll support you to sell our stuff, but beyond that, that's not important. And we've seen the best vendors really focus on a mission to improve the health of their partners and improve the profitability of their partners as a primary focus versus selling their products. And when they do that, there's obviously a significant pull-through on products that enhances their ability to sell products. And so, again, we'll get into that a little bit more, kind of a teaser here for you at the conference for those of you that will be in attendance. We'll talk more about the vendor difference and how vendors can evolve their models in supporting you better, and some of the things we think you should be asking for in the vendor community. To answer Chris's question, I'm going to go back one slide about wedges, to spend a couple minutes on wedges. Wedges are really an easy-to-buy, fixed-fee, fixed-scope offering, usually around an assessment or around a scoping exercise that the client will see value in, right? You know, nobody likes to buy, quote-unquote, an assessment if they feel it's part of the sales process, and we usually get a lot of pushback from our clients and potential clients about this. But if it's positioned properly and it's linked to the full technology offering in a meaningful way, and that's typically done through pricing incentives to utilize you for the full effort on the wedge. So, for example, you might charge $10 grand for a wedge, but you know, a portion of that fee, let's say $7,500 of it, is applicable to the full technology offering if they proceed to go with you. If not, they just, you know, pay for the wedge. But the wedge is an easy-to-buy scoping or assessment offering is the easiest way to sort of sum it up. We find that, just as a reference, that these service offerings become productized. And when we refer to productization, we mean it has a name and it has a price associated with it. It's pretty much that simple. And that way it's easier to buy. So there's a study done that was done some time ago about how buyers of services perceive those services and how they take action against buying them versus how they buy products. And this was a study, I believe, done by Harvard Business School, and it focused on the fact that if a service is packaged like a product, aka it has a name and a price and there's a very specific deliverable. About 70% of the market can conceptualize how to buy that and take action to buy it. If it's simply sold as a sort of a broad brush deliverable, meaning this is what you're going to get, and we haven't branded it, and it doesn't have a price, direct price associated with it, aka fixed price, fixed scope engagement, only about 30% of the market, their target market, could conceptualize how to buy that. And so as you can see, there's a big delta there. There's about a 40% difference in someone's ability to conceptualize and take action on buying that set of services if it's got a wrapper around it or put in a box is the best way I would say. So with that, I'll move to questions. Here's myself. I'm the bald guy on the right, and my business partner, Reed. We're available to you guys to answer any questions. I guess I would also offer that we've put together a special offer for those of you that are in the throes of the business transformation, that if you'd like to learn more about, essentially it's a business transformation audit as well as a strategic planning workshop to sort of help jumpstart your transformation and or answer questions about the transformation process. If you'd like to learn more about that, just feel free to email me and I'll send you the details of the offer. But with that, I'll open it for questions. If you guys have specific questions you want to ask, feel free to put them in the box and we'll get them addressed. Guys awake out there? Hopefully you're typing madly.
Mike, there's a question about why does moving to the recurring support contract versus time and materials utilization make companies more efficient?
There we go. Sorry, I got to scan up here. I'm looking through that. So moving to the support contract versus time and materials utilization, it has to do with waste, essentially. So in the case of a time and materials contract, oftentimes the client will not do their part. And if the client does not do their part, it will usually, you as the systems integrator are the one that is on the hook, right? You are the one that has to say, oh yeah, we can't bill that time, or oh yeah, we have to come back out, or whatever it is. So there's some inherent project-based waste that's associated with a time and materials contract. When it's a subscription or a reoccurring support contract, which is what the question focused on, it tends to remove that waste in the sense that it's a predictable spend, and you will be able to not have that time go away, because essentially they're going to pay you that subscription rate, and let's just say for nice round numbers it's some amount of money per month. So let's say it's $25,000 a month, or $10,000, or it could be any number, $50,000. You've baked into your pricing kind of how that client will work, and so the other opportunity for picking up additional margin is through efficiency, because you'll have a built-in a motivation to be more efficient inside your business in that fixed fee model. AKA, if you can deploy technology and fewer technical staff against a problem for a client, it becomes more profitable, right? And what we tend to find is over a period of time, that systems integrators learn how to be much more efficient on a fixed fee or a fixed subscription model than they do on time and materials. I see a question about aligning to only one industry segment. It actually, there's a question about risk, right? So the key here is that there is risk, right? There's excessive risk in the market today, and by focusing on a variety of industries, you're not mitigating that risk. I know that sounds counterintuitive, but the key in picking a vertical is to make sure that the market is large enough to allow you to reach your goals. And I think there's some additional research that has to be done around probably particularly risky industries. So when we think about oil and gas, certainly, you know, we know that oil and gas, there's been plenty of ups and downs in oil and gas over the last 30 years. And in looking at focusing on oil and gas, I think it would be critical to, you know, look at that closely. So, for example, when we work with a client, help them move to this vertical focus, we do an extensive amount of research on their behalf to determine, you know, what is the best market based on the work they've done, but also based on sort of an analysis of the greenfield opportunity, and then what is the systemic risk of a particular market. I would say that when I put up the two slides about, you know, the high-performing systems integrators versus those that are flagging, one of the biggest differences between them is that the highest performing integrators focus on one market. And it isn't a particular market, probably ranges 20 or 30 micro markets from our experience. And so if you have other questions about that, certainly put them up there. Talk about NOC in-house. There's a question here about, you know, do you have your NOC in-house or outsource the service entirely? It certainly does depend on your customer mix. I think there's a huge move towards the cloud, right, and where you can leverage cloud-based infrastructure and 5 nines. I think that makes sense. I believe that, you know, with the major vendors that are tools that are available, that makes sense. I mean, there's just, I don't know enough to answer the question. We have very small clients, and I say very small, meaning clients that are $1 million to $2 million in revenue, doing their NOC in-house, right? And we have people who are, it just varies depending on the situation. There's not kind of a one-size-fits-all on that. From a travel cost perspective, I think, you know, this is a question that Evan submitted. I would tell you that it's usually, for these companies that are focused vertically, always a subscription plus expenses, right? And usually those expenses are plus travel costs and or per diem, and they're always paid. So we don't see a ton of pushback on this if I look at the market overall. And generally, I think that's the case because if you're positioned well as the number 1 or number 2 vendor in the market you choose to serve, and understand I'm being very focused here, right? You're going to have a carve out a niche where you're an expert. Travel cost and cost in general does not become a big factor. And so let me just repeat that again. We routinely see folks that are highly specialized and verticalized charge far more than a local generalist and get their travel costs reimbursed. Because what's more important to that client is mitigating risk. And the perception is that there's far less risk in someone that's done a project or managed an effort like you're proposing, you know, 10, 15, 20, 50, 100 times than someone who hasn't. And so that's an important point. There's a question from Reggie about increased concern about cyber network data security and sort of what industries are leading the charge on the development of the IT strategy to mitigate such risk. There is a ton of opportunity in data security, cyber network and data security. We're seeing that market as grow about 20% year over year, 20 to 21% in all areas of technology. The most successful and fastest growing companies in data security are highly specialized on certain micro niches, and they're crushing it. They're also, when you look at a valuation multiple, like we talked about early on, they're folks that have really experienced really stratospheric growth. I mean, we've seen them growing from, startup to $2 million to $6 million to $12 million. I mean, they're growing very quickly year over year. So there is huge opportunity and a tremendous amount of concern. Interestingly enough, there's so much concern. There's a ton of concern about the cloud and what the cloud means, and will the cloud really be secured? Is my data secured? All that stuff. As you guys know, anyone working in and around the cloud with data, that's a far more secure environment than on-premise or even private cloud infrastructures. And so I think as the market becomes smarter about that, we'll begin to see more concern, but it'll also begin to migrate that. There'll be a market opportunity in network security. Also, I have another question here. This one's from Mike Greger. Says that, SIs are often the small fish in the pond when negotiating with large Fortune 500 clients. What strategy have you seen to move projects and contracts towards fixed quote versus T&M? There's all kinds of interesting movement there. Clients, Fortune 500 clients and all clients in general like the subscription or fixed quote model because the perception is it mitigates risk on their part and puts risk on you, right? And as long as you can deliver to the service level agreement, that's generally not the case. It is a perception, so I think it makes it easier to sell that type of work, but it's generally not the case because fixed fee or subscription does not mean unlimited scope, okay? It means fixed fee, fixed scope, or fixed subscription sprint with a fixed scope. And it does require you to be exceptionally good at project management and call the client out when they're out of bounds on scope. And I don't want to, beat that drum too loudly, but I would say as a community, most systems integrators over time that build time and materials have gotten sloppy as it relates to project management. We see that almost universally because there is no real incentive to manage it very tightly. You need to manage the client's expectations pretty tightly, but there's no incentive to manage scope tightly on a time and materials contract. There's a pile of incentive to manage it when you're on a fixed fee or when you're in a fixed sprint or subscription model. And when you do that, there's benefits that come on both sides. So I would tell you that it's generally easier because you're removing the commoditization discussion about hourly rate by role, and you're just saying, yep, we can do it in 3 months. It's $50 grand a month on a subscription for this level of deliverable. Now, you Mr. Client, have to do these things, and we have to do these things. And if for whatever reason there's a move away from the scope, generally that move away from the scope is going to be based on the client changing their mind or making a change in the project, then you're going to pay more. And there's some models for how you do that. I recommend that you, if it's turned into a subscription, that you sell another increment, sprint increment, or another month of service or 2 weeks of service in order to do that work. And that's a simplified bucket of time sort of process. It's not, when I say bucket of time, I don't mean it's a bucket of hours. I suspect a lot of you guys sell bucket of hours, use it or lose it. Maybe some of that is maintenance and support. You're still getting down to an hourly commodity rate discussion when you do that. And I would recommend, and we've seen, our clients move away from that, and it becomes just a very, it becomes just a value exchange for the spend. Any other questions? Yes, Al? Marciani. Like I said before, we're available to you if you want to talk about your specific situation, or more importantly, you want to take advantage of our special offer for CSIA members. It's pretty substantial discount on our services, about a $5,000 discount. So if you guys would like to learn more about that and how we might be able to analyze your situation, just drop me an email. I'll send you the details. Tony?
Thank you, Mike. And thank you, everyone, for participation in today's program. Note that the full webinar will be archived on controlsys.org within the next day or so. Also, many thanks again to our host and sponsor, Software Toolbox. Find them on the web at softwaretoolbox.com. Very shortly, you'll receive a 30-second evaluation about today's program. Your feedback is valuable to us, so we ask that you please complete it. Lastly, if you have not done so already, I encourage you to register for the 2017 CSIA Executive Conference in Fort Lauderdale, Florida, May 2nd through the 5th, where Mike will be a featured presenter. This is Tony Verhoeven at CSIA. Thanks again for attending. Goodbye.